Inshallah, for her health and for your own well-being, another vow, salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. before we begin the program, just a few minor announcements. If you have your children with you in the main hall, hopefully you can keep them quiet and seated beside you for the duration of the lecture. If not, we do have accommodations for children under 3 years old. There's a toddler's room. The parents are welcome to be in there. The lecture will be live in the toddler's room. And then for 4 through 10, there's also going to be a kids program that your kids can attend during the main majlis, inshallah. So make sure that you can take advantage of these accommodations if you need to. Without further ado, I would like to ask Shaykh Mahdi to attend to the podium with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصى العادون ولا يؤتي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يوم يتذكر الإنسان ما سعى وبرزت الجحيم لمن يرى فأما من طغى وآثر الحياة الدنيا فإن الجحيم هي المأوى وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. For the hastening and the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic we'll be discussing tonight, inshallah, is the topic that is crucial in our understanding of Islam. And it also very much correlates with the Sirah of our beloved mother, Fatimiyya in the many stances that she took during those final days and months of her life. That is the topic of fearing Allah. What does it mean to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Before getting into the topic a little bit more, I will tell you, in traveling and visiting different communities and speaking to many of those who might feel like they don't connect with the faith very much, this concept, and the concept of fearing Allah, having the fear of Allah in my heart, is one of the most misunderstood concepts within this generation of Muslims. If you ask the average young Muslim, what does it mean to fear Allah? Typically, he will try to hide this topic. He will tell you not to speak of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too much. Let us speak more about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will be difficult for him to explain what it means to fear Allah to a non-Muslim friend, for example, and so on and so forth. So much so that many times you find people who cannot connect with the faith. Part of that is because this idea of fear keeps coming up in the verses of the Quran. And not just in the Quran, also in the Sirah of Lady Fatima as well. Amongst those lines that she mentioned in Khutbah Fatimiyya was اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ. Fear Allah the way He is worthy of being feared. Yes? وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. And do not leave this world unless that you have submit yourself to Him. And she continued to say, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Only those of the servants of Allah who are knowledgeable will truly fear Allah. Wherever you go in the Sirah of the al-Bayt, fearing Allah keeps coming up. Yes? When you go to the verses of the Quran, you find the same thing again. And today, of course, we find there are those in the world who don't fear Allah. And when they don't fear Allah, there is all sorts of corruption that they create in today's world. You find what's happening today in Palestine. You see what's happening today in Lebanon. You saw what happened yesterday in Pakistan and Parachinag, and the Shia brothers and sisters who were massacred. Yes, more than 50 at least. Yes, the numbers are still going up. These are individuals who don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what happens when a human being doesn't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, this concept of fearing Allah is something we have to delve deeper into. Normally, when we talk about fear, we understand the importance of it. In today's world, in the modern or the materialistic lifestyle that we have, fear, like many other emotions, plays a very critical role. Why? Because if you don't have fear, you will never prepare for the dangers that will come your way. A person who doesn't fear illness will not take his hygienic precautions. A person who doesn't fear an accident and losing his life will never put on his seatbelts. So fear in protecting us from the dangers that we deal with in our life, definitely important. Hence you might see a child who hasn't developed a sense of fear yet. You know how stressful that is for the parents. When the child is so young still, he still doesn't understand fear. He still doesn't understand dangers. This is one of the most dangerous things that can be there for a child. If he doesn't have fear when it comes to the dangers in this life. If he wants to cross the road, 50 parents have to be watching him in these moments because he hasn't developed a sense of fear yet. All of this makes sense. The issue gets a little complex when we talk about fearing Allah and not fearing dangers. When it comes to fearing dangers, it's easy. I can say you should have a fear of this danger. It makes sense to you. But then the Quran says you should fear Allah. But we're taught Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dangerous. We're taught Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. We're taught Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares more about us than our own parents. We're taught Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very forgiving. All of these things. And yet the Quran speaks about this topic of fearing Him. So what does this really mean? Because you find the average Muslim is difficult for him to digest this concept, you will find different people have different approaches when it comes to this issue. There are those, they come forward and say, no, when Islam says fear Allah, it doesn't really mean fearing Allah. It's just a metaphor, it doesn't really mean it like that. It doesn't make sense for you to fear someone that you have love for, to fear someone that you revere. This is one approach. Another one will come forward and say, listen, I don't want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear. I want to worship Allah because I love Him. I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He is worthy of being worshipped. In fact, He will discourage you from worshiping Allah out of fear. He will tell you, if you worship someone out of fear, this is not real worship. This is not real submission. Submission is when you do it voluntarily, is when you do it out of love because you find this person worthy. He'll quote a narration from the first Imam that said the people who worship are three categories. The most of them, the highest of them, is the one who worships because he finds Allah worthy of being worshipped. And the lowest of them is the one who worships out of fear of hellfire. Narration we have all heard before. He'll tell you, listen, worshipping Allah out of fear is not spiritual. Then there will come a third group. They'll say, Shaykh, we understand fearing Allah is there in the verses of the Quran, it's there in Hadith. But why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to speak with us in this way? Why did He have to speak to us of all of these punishments? Can't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala apply a little bit of what I call gentle parenting? Yes? Why couldn't He have used a little bit of gentle parenting? Instead of telling us about the punishment of not praying, why didn't He just tell us more about the reward of the one who does pray? Instead of telling us about the punishment of not fasting, why didn't He just tell us of the reward of the person who does in fact fast? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to bring up punishment anyways? And many other questions that come up with regards to this topic. And therefore, in order to delve into this topic more tonight, we'll pose the following questions. Number one, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a dangerous entity, and He is more merciful to me than my own parents, then why does Quran and Hadith keep speaking of this idea and concept of fearing Allah? Number two, if I fear Allah, what does that look like on a practical level? Does that mean I'm sitting in a corner and my hands are constantly shaking because I feel like God is out to get me any second? Or did the Quran describe for us what it means practically, whether a person fears Allah or not? Number three, when God speaks of those servants and praises servants who fear Him, who have taqwa, who have khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did He say these servants never do anything wrong? Or do these servants in fact end up committing sins from time to time? Number four, what is the greater level of fearing Allah that the Ahlul Bayt had that has nothing to do with punishment and the day of judgment? Number five, is it true that worshipping Allah out of fear and not out of His love is not spiritual, and that I should only aim to worship Allah out of love? And number six, and finally, when I remember the consequences of my deeds and my sins, and Shaitan wants to make me lose hope, what are the things I should remember when it comes to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how the Ahlul Bayt manifest that mercy that makes me never lose hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 6 questions with Allah salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Fear is normally a good thing, but the topic takes a turn when you say fear Allah. I thought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to be very merciful to me. I thought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not supposed to be a danger. I thought God is supposed to protect me from other dangers that are coming my way. Here you are saying, no, you should fear Allah as if He is dangerous. The Quran also touches on this. The Quran keeps describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the one who doesn't carry any harm for you. He is the one who brings blessings to you. Hence you find in the Quran there is a very beautiful combination between 2 names. It comes up in multiple surahs. In particular in Surah Jum'ah we read this, yes? The Quran keeps saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is Al-Malik, Al-Quddus. The reason why the Quran puts these 2 terms right beside one another is why? Because Al-Malik is the one who has authority. It's the one who's powerful. It's the one who runs the show. Then the Quran immediately says, yes, He is Al-Malik. He has all the authority in the world, but He is also Al-Quddus. He is holy. He doesn't misuse that power that He has. Justice is always His way. Injustice doesn't make sense for Him. He is Malik, but He is Al-Quddus. He's not like the muluk of this world. People of this world, the moment they become powerful, then the corruption begins. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus in multiple verses of the Quran. This combination is made. Okay. then why is it that we find in the verses of the Quran and in Hadith this concept of fearing Allah? And to make things even worse, it doesn't come up even with one set of terminology. The Quran uses maybe 7 to 8 different forms of terminology to refer to the same concept. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says sometimes, ittaqullah. Yeah, taqwa. Sometimes Allah says you should have in your heart khashya of Allah. Sometimes the Quran says you should have rahba of Allah. Sometimes the Quran says there are those who are min adab rabbihim mushfiqun, ishfaqa. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am giving you tahdhir, warning. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indhar, I'm telling you of what's happening in the future. It's not good news. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically uses the word khawf. So it's one of those concepts that you cannot read 1 or 2 or 3 pages of the Quran unless you will come across this. It's one of those concepts you cannot miss. It's foundational to our faith. It is central to our faith. Even if you read just the first 2 pages of the Quran, because unfortunately we're not in the habit of reading Quran. We only read the first 2 pages, the pages that look pretty. That's the ones that have the beautiful prints at the beginning. Those are the only 2 pages you and I read usually, yes? Even if you just read those, immediately the Quran says, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. You have to have taqwa here. So this keeps coming up in the verses of the Quran and in Hadith. So what does it mean to fear Allah? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't carry any harm for us. Say, so Shaykh, I know what it means to fear Allah. Allah carries for us punishment on the Day of Judgment. So the Quran is saying you should be fearful of Allah because He's going to bring that punishment. He's going to punish you. So this is a concept we have to break down a little bit more. In order to understand this, we have to understand a very important principle in the Quran. The Quran speaks to you and I at different levels. Quran wasn't a book just for people 1400 years ago. It also wasn't a book only for people 1400 years later. Quran was a book for people of all times. Hence, the Quran has addressed the same topic in different terminology and in different ways, because people of different times will understand certain concepts in different ways. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes He says, yes, if you disobey me, Allah will punish you. And then when you get a little bit closer with the verses of the Quran, you realize, this punishment doesn't even come from Him. See, but over there you said, fear Allah. And He says, yes, I've summarized it over there. I just tell you, fear Allah. But if you want a little bit more of a technical understanding, this is what happens on the Day of Judgment. On the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't get angry at you. Na'udhu billah, snap His fingers, and then there's a punishment for you. It's not how it works. So how does it work? Quran came and said, listen, every one of these deeds of yours that you do in this world, they have behind them a spiritual reality. There's a spiritual reality behind them. And in this world, you only see the physical reality of these deeds. So, you take the wealth of another person. How long did this take you? 5 seconds. When did it happen? Where did it happen? At a particular time, in a particular place. Done. When the time and place for this thing expires, it's over. But then the Quran said, no, there's a spiritual reality behind this deed that sticks with you all the way to the Day of Judgment. No matter what you do, it will always be connected to you. You cannot get rid of it. If that deed was a deed that Islam refers to as haram, that means the spiritual reality of that deed is a terrible spiritual reality. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings you on the Day of Judgment and lifts the veils, you see the spiritual reality of your deeds, and all of a sudden you see, yes, when I was stealing the wealth of this person, as the Quran says, I was taking fire and putting it in my belly. So did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish me? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all He did was move you from a world where you only saw the physical reality of these deeds to a world where now you see the spiritual reality of these deeds. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is associated with this whole process, He says what? Fear Allah. Fear the justice of Allah. Is the punishment coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, the punishment is not coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The punishment is coming from the reality of my own deed. Hence why the verses of the Quran say, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةً خَيْرًا يَرَهُ. He will see the deed itself, not the reward that God gave him because he was happy with him. This is all the sentence that we fill in. Allah, because you made Allah happy, so now Allah, na'udhu as if, he's like a human being like you and I. Like he has emotions like you and I. You made Allah happy, so now because you made Allah happy, He's happy with you. Because He's happy with you, you have this reward now. No, that's not how it works. No, you will see the deed itself. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. Whoever does any bad deed will see the bad deed itself. You are dealing with the spiritual reality of your deeds. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to summarize all of this, what does He say in the Quran? He says, ittaqillah. Fear Allah. Why? Because God is going to bring punishment? No. Because God oversees the day of judgment. He is associated with this day of judgment. It's very similar to if someone did something wrong and then he went to court. And in the court, he's looking and he's fearful of the judge. Is he really fearful of the judge, or is the punishment coming from somewhere else? Is the punishment coming from the law? Is the punishment coming from the terrible things that he did? But because the judge is running this show, he fears who? He fears the judge. He says, oh, what's this judge going to do with me? In reality, it's not the judge. It's the law. But because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is associated with that day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarizes all of this. Ittaqillah, fear Allah, meaning fear the consequences of your deeds. Yes, your deeds have consequences. Yes, they are real consequences. Yes, there will come a day where I will have to deal with those consequences. This is fearing Allah. Hence you find a beautiful narration from our beloved Prophet, Muhammadin al-Mustafa, salawatullah. The Prophet came to his companions one day. He said, my companions, last night I had a dream. وَرَأَيْتُ فِيهَا الْأَعَاجِيبِ. I saw in this dream astonishing things. Yes? He said, Ya Rasulullah, حَدِّثْنَا بِهِ. Why don't you tell us what you saw in your dream? He began. And he began to explain the spiritual reality behind different deeds. It's a long narration. Shaykh al-Sadr has narrated. So, I'll mention some of them. He said, I saw a man, وَرَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِنْ أُمَّتِ. I saw a man from my ummah. وَقَدْ أَتَاهُ مَلَكُ الْمَوْتِ لِيَقْبِضَ رُوحَهُ. Malakul Maut was already on his way to come and take his soul. Yes? فَجَاءَهُ بِرُّهُ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. Before Malakul Maut could get to him, the goodness that he did to his parents came and stopped Malakul Maut. See how the Prophet speaks of these deeds as beings, as entities. فَجَاءَهُ. He came to him, he stopped Malikul Maut from taking his soul. وَرَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِّنْ أُمَّتِي قَدْ بُسِطَ عَلَيْهِ عَذَابُ الْقَبْرِ. I saw another one from my ummah. The punishment in the grave was prepared for him. He was now going to be punished in the grave because of his sins. Yes? So what happened? فَجَاءَهُ وُضُوءُهُ. His wudu came and stopped it. Wudu? I thought wudu is just an action I do. No. Every act that you do has a spiritual reality behind it. It sticks with you forever. Yes? There's only a couple ways you can distance yourself from the spiritual reality of a deed. If it's a good deed in one way, it's a bad deed in a different way. He continued, he said, وَرَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِّنْ أُمَّتِي. I saw a man from my ummah. Everything around him was dark. In front of him, darkness. Behind him, darkness. Left and right. In the darkness, yes? So what came and saved him? فَجَاءَهُ حَجُّهُ وَعُمْرَتُهُ. His hajj and umrah came and saved him. Brought him light. وَرَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِّنْ أُمَّتِي يَتَّقِي وَهَجَ النِّيرَانِ. I saw a man from my ummah. The flames of hellfire were, coming onto his face. They were burning him. فَجَاءَتْهُ صَدَقَتُهُ. His sadaqah came and became a shade and and a shield from the flames of hellfire. Yes. Long narration. The last one the Prophet mentioned is very beautiful. He said, وَرَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِّنْ أُمَّتِي I saw a man from my ummah. He was walking on the bridge of Sirat. Except he couldn't walk straight. Yes? He was falling on the left a little bit on the right. He was struggling to make his way onto the other side of the bridge of Sirat. So he said, okay, so what helped him in those moments? The Prophet said, فَجَاءَتْهُ صَلَاتُهُ His salat came, held his hand to help him walk across the bridge of Sirat. The Ahlul Bayt, when they come and tell us, this is haram, that is haram, what they mean is that there's a spiritual reality for this deed. It is a terrible spiritual reality. You don't even want to be close to this. And if you decide to engage in it, that spiritual reality will be tied with your soul, which means there will be punishment on the Day of Judgment. So fearing Allah means I have the humility to understand there are consequences for my deeds. This is what it means to fear Allah. Hence the verses of the Quran came forward and explained to us even more. Practically, if I want to see if I fear Allah, what does that mean on a practical level? The Quran and Surah Nazi'at clarified this for us. These are the verses we started out the lecture with. The Quran says, يَوْمَ يَتَذَكَّرُ الْإِنسَانُ مَا سَعَى The day the human being will remember everything that he put effort into, good or bad. Yes? وَبُرِّزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِمَنْ يَرَى The hellfire, the fire of it is set ablaze. Yes? Quran says there's two groups of people. فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى The one who transgressed. وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا And he preferred this world. فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى His place is in hellfire. So then the Quran moves on to the next category. It says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ As it relates to the one who fears Allah. So what does it mean to fear Allah? So, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ As it relates to the one who fears Allah. And then the Quran said, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ He told himself no when it comes to sins. He did nahya. He forbid himself when it came to sins. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى His place is in heaven. Yes? So the Quran said, listen, the people who fear Allah, they forbid their soul from committing sins. Now I ask you a question. When you forbid someone from committing a sin, does it mean the person never does it? No, not necessarily. You tell your children not to do a lot of things. And then the children ended up doing it. Yes? You tell this person you shouldn't be doing this. Does it mean they'll never touch it? No, sometimes they end up committing that deed, yes. But the Quran made something very, very clear. This is what it means to fear Allah. It's that my disposition, my default position, when I come to sin, is no. Now, if Shaitan works hard to trick me, that's a separate discussion. Can he trick me? Yes. Can he get the best of me? Yes. But I never give myself a green light to do as I wish. The one who gives himself a green light to do as he wishes, the Quran says, he doesn't fear Allah. The one who, when he comes to sin, his disposition, his natural default is what? No, I'm not supposed to be doing this. No, I don't think this is a good idea. Deep down, there's alarms going off in his mind when he comes across sin. The Quran said the bare minimum level of fearing Allah is what? When you come across sin, you never give yourself a green light. When you commit it, you don't justify it afterwards. A sign of fearing Allah is that when I do that wrong deed, how quickly do I come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Quran said fearing Allah doesn't mean you're perfect all the time. No. Quran said fearing Allah means you never give yourself a green light. You don't justify it. So I missed the salat. People react to that in two different ways. There are people who come back and say, it's not a big deal. Who cares? We'll make up for it later. It doesn't matter. This person doesn't fear Allah. This is scary. And then there's the one who fears Allah and says, I missed this, I shouldn't have done this. And so next time I have to plan so I don't. There's a person who fears Allah. He doesn't justify his wrongdoings. He has enough humility to say there are consequences for my deeds, so I shouldn't have done this. why in the verses of the Quran, this is very important, very crucial point. In the verses of the Quran said, the more you fear Allah, the more you qualify for the mercy of Allah. Usually when you fear someone, that means there's a threat from their way, yes? When you fear someone, you distance yourself from that person. Quran said the fear of Allah is different. If you have the decency to accept that there are consequences to your deeds, now the doors of the mercy of Allah open upon you. Wait, I thought the one who fears Allah, he never does anything wrong. No, that's wrong. The one who fears Allah, his default is that I'm not going to engage in the sin. When he falls short, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the doors of his mercy are wide open for this person. You know why? Because he had the decency not to justify what he was doing. He had the decency to say, I know this was wrong. I'm not supposed to be doing this. This level of decency is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks of us. And the more a person has this level of decency, and the key word accountability to Allah, the more he qualifies for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more he sits there and justifies it and says it's not a big deal, the more he has distanced himself from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the Quran said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَيْبِ. Those who fear Allah when others aren't around, for example. Yes? Others aren't present to see what this person is doing. لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ. Allah promised forgiveness for them. I thought the person who fears Allah is not supposed to commit sins when nobody else is around. No. The Quran said his disposition is, I'm not supposed to be ending up doing this. If shaitan tricks him, then the Quran said he has a lot of mercy. So, this elephant in the room whenever we talk about Islamic spirituality, which is fearing Allah in Islam, fearing Allah and receiving the mercy of Allah are two sides of the same coin. The more you fear Allah, as in, the more I take on a sense of accountability, the more I qualify for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at that servant, he says, I know he fell short, but you know what? He didn't give himself a green light. No, he found himself accountable to me, so my doors of mercy are open upon this individual. Yes. This is why fearing Allah comes up so often in the verses of the Quran, because it is the key to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence this beautiful verse of the Quran that we read. Allah salawat, please. He said, Allah nazzala ahsan al-hadith. Allah has revealed the best of speech. Kitaban mutashabiha. This book, some parts of it are similar. They relate to other parts of it. They link with other parts of it. Mathaniya. تَقْشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُم. There are people, they fear their Lord. When they fear their Lord, as in they have a sense of accountability, when they read these verses, yes, it says my deeds have consequences, yes? So the Quran says their skin, they begin to shiver when they read the verses of the Quran. Sense of accountability. But then the Quran says, because they have this sense of accountability, they know the doors of the mercy of Allah is also open upon them now. Because they have this sense of accountability. So then what happens? ثُمَّ تَلِينُ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَجُلُودُهُمْ إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Now all of a sudden that fear turns into tranquility. How does this work? Because the moment I fear Allah, the moment I have accountability to Allah, Allah has promised His mercy for me. It is a fear that does not remain. It is a fear that comes and then turns into tranquility. To the extent I fear Allah, that's how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy I qualify for. That's why the first Imam has a very beautiful narration, yes? He says, if anyone wants to see where they stand in the eyes of Allah, their value in the eyes of Allah. Yeah? Many of us might have wondered this. You know, if I show up on the Day of Judgment, where do I stand in the eyes of Allah? Out of 10, spiritually. Do I stand at level 6, level 5? You know, I pray, I fast, I do all these good deeds, draw kumid, I recite, I do all these things. So, on a level of 1 to 10, where am I in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This narration answers that question. said, "Man ahabba an ya'lama kayfa manzilatahu 'inda Allah." Whoever wants to know what his status is like in the eyes of Allah. The Imam said, he has to see how much accountability he has to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how great he sees Allah in his eyes. If I want to see how great I am in the eyes of Allah, I have to see how great is Allah in my eyes. When I come across sin, is it a big deal for me? Or no, I give myself a green light to do whatever. If I give myself a green light to do whatever, then my status in the eyes of Allah is similar. He thinks he's running the show himself. Let him do his thing. And then there are servants, when they come across a sin, he says, no, Allah is watching. I don't know, I don't want to do this. I know this is wrong. This shouldn't be what I'm supposed to be doing right now. So on and so forth. The more this accountability he has, the narration says, he has a higher status in the eyes of Allah. Why? Because God has a high status in his eyes. You want to see where you stand in the eyes of Allah? You have to see where Allah stands in your eyes. This is the base level of fearing Allah. Then there is a second level of fearing Allah that the al-Bayt had and the angels had that had nothing to do with any of this punishment and consequences and all that kind of stuff. Why? Because they're ma'soom. The angels are ma'soom. And yet the Quran said, يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُمْ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ. They fear Allah. This second type of fear is different from the first type that you and I deal with. The second type of fear is just a sense of being overwhelmed by the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Overwhelmed. It's so great, you begin to sweat. It's so great, yes, your body begins to shiver. Not because you're fearful, like you did something wrong. No, you're just in the presence of someone whose presence is so overwhelming, you don't know what to do with it. There's one scholar, he gave a very good example. He said, like the women of Egypt when they saw Yusuf, in the famous story of Yusuf that the Quran talks about, yes? When the women of Egypt saw Yusuf, what did they do? The Quran says they cut their hands. Now these women, were they cutting their hands on purpose? No, they were overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. So when the al-Bayt stand and pray so much that the narration says Lady Fatima, she used to go pale during the time of Salah, and she would pray for so long her feet would get inflamed. This is all because they're overwhelmed by the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not like the ma'soom stands there and says, I'm going to pray so long that my feet get inflamed. No, it's not himself in that moment. Not herself in that moment. This is the second type of fear, second level of fear. But the important thing is, nobody can even get close to that second level unless they start from level number 1. Unless someone worships Allah out of fear, meaning the consequences of my deeds, he can never get to a level where he worships Allah out of love and because he finds Allah worthy of it. Impossible. You can't graduate to level number 2 unless you start with this basics. The basics is having the humility to accept that my deeds have consequences. Unless he can pass through this, he cannot even come close to second level number 2. So then you find people, and sometimes speakers even say this, it's quite a shame that sometimes speakers even say this. Say, listen, don't worship Allah out of fear. Only worship Allah out of love. Worshipping Allah out of love is level number 2. I have to graduate to that level. For you and I, we're starting out worshiping Allah out of fear, as in, not because God is scary and all this kind, because I understand there are consequences to my deeds, and I have accountability because of that, is very spiritual. It's the most spiritual thing you can do. You know why? Because there's a lot of humility in it. Because I'm not in charge. I'm not an outlaw. I can't just give myself a green light to do whatever. That's very spiritual. Worshipping Allah because I know there are consequences to my deeds is a very spiritual step that I can take. Yes, it's getting a bad rep. Okay, so I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I know there are consequences to my deeds. Okay, then someone comes forward and says, Shaikh, why do we even have to get into this discussion? Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just tell us of the rewards? Why didn't He tell us gentle parenting? Why didn't He tell us about if you do this good deed, then you'll make it into heaven? Why didn't He tell us about all this? Well, the answer is He did. It didn't work. One scholar, a very good example. He said, listen, this whole thing about just tell us about the rewards, it doesn't work. That's the problem. He said, how much did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us about the rewards of praying Salatul Layl? And we have, you go around, you ask Muslims, they'll all be able to tell you. Yeah, Shia and Sunni, they'll all be able to tell you. And then he said, okay, so how many people pray Salatul Layl? I don't know, let's say 10%. He said, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if you don't wake up for this 2 rakat Fajr, no, it's not just reward now. There's consequences, yes? So how many people wake up for Fajr? Whatever that number is, it's a lot more than those who wake up for Salatul Layl, yes? Big difference. Why? Because one of them became obligatory. Because one of them, I understood there were consequences for it. If you say, oh, but it shouldn't be like that, you have to look at yourself. You can't look at Allah. You have to look at yourself and say, why am I like this? Then He has to bring up consequences for me to walk in that direction. That's a flaw with me. It's not a flaw with Him. Yes. Hence, you find people today, if they don't fear Allah, they will do everything, every crime that you can possibly think of, they will commit. Yes? You see what's happening in Palestine right now? Starving the population, stopping medicine from getting in. I don't know, bombing them. I don't know, shooting with snipers. Every war crime that you can put on a list, yes, has probably happened in those lands. Why? Because the moment a man or a woman doesn't fear Allah, then there's nothing that's going to stop him in this world. Nothing. You see, there are people, they're not even engaged in these things, but they support it. See, this is wrong. He says, no, it's not wrong. It's not wrong for these 5 reasons. Ben Shapiro will come, he'll explain the whole genocide in a way where you walk away and say, oh yeah, I think it actually makes sense. This is what happens when someone doesn't fear Allah. Hence the Quran brought up the fear of Allah over and over again. However, as the last point, as much as the Ahlul Bayt spoke about your deeds have consequences, yes, but they also said what? They said, if you accept this, the doors of the mercy of Allah open up to you, which means the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is then there for you. And you are never to underestimate the mercy that comes the moment you take on a little bit of accountability between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence the narration says, there are people, in this world they have a sense of accountability, so they make up for their sins, they repent, they do different things. There's maybe 30 different things a human being can do to have his sins forgiven from him. Then there are those, their punishment at the time of death purifies them. Then there are those, their sins are so much, it goes, it spills into their barzakh. Then there are those on the day of judgment, the ahwal of the day of judgment, the worries and the concerns of the day of judgment purifies them of their sins. But then the narration say there are those who are so full of sins, still at that point, they're not purified. Yes? But at the end of the day, he had some sense of accountability between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the end of the day, he understood, I can't give myself a green light to do as I wish. Yes? So they benefit, hopefully, from what? From the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt. That's the last resort. That's your final shot. My final shot is the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt on the Day of Judgment, which is a manifestation of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shia and Sunni believe in the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt. For them it's the prophets. For us that of course extends through who? It also extends through the Ahlul Bayt as well. But if you read Sahih al-Bukhari, you will come across a hadith known as Ash-Shafa'atul Kubra, the greatest shafa'ah, such that even the other prophets of God come and ask the final prophet for his shafa'ah on that day. The concept of shafa'ah as a concept at its foundation, Shia and Sunni believe in this idea. Of course, we have a different take a little bit on some of the details. Of those details is the status of the family of the prophet, because we believe they also have the status of shafa'ah. And amongst those who has that status is none but Lady Fatima, because the narration says, on the Day of Judgment, there are those who come on On their forehead it is written that they are lovers of al-Bayt. But he comes with many, many sins. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders his angels to take him towards hellfire. And they do. And on the way, as he's headed that way, the narration says Fatima stands at the door of hellfire. And she calls out to Allah, Ya Rabbi, O Allah, this is why Sammaytani Fatima. This is why you named me Fatima. Why? Because Fatima means to separate things, yes? Said because you have separated those who love me and love my family from the hellfire. Ya Allah, is this not why you named me Fatima? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, yes, this is why I named you Fatima. O Fatima, anyone that you see who's come with his sins, but at his core was a lover of you and the Ahlul Bayt. At his core had some sense of accountability between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. O Fatima, take his hand, وَأَدْخِلِيهِ الْجَنَّةِ. Take his hand and walk him into heaven. This is the final resort, the final manifestation of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This lady, with this status, what happened to her after the Prophet? And the calamities that came her way after the Prophet. Let's dim the lights, inshallah, and take our hearts to the city of Medina. Sallallahu alayki ya bint Rasulullah. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatimah al-Zahra. During these days and nights, Fatima has become more and more weak. And not just because of the masa'ib that she's going through, but also because of losing her father and knowing that she doesn't have any support in Medina anymore. This house that everyone used to come and revere, this house that everyone used to respect in Medina. Now people come, they walk by Ali, they don't respond to the salam of Ali anymore. They turn away from the family of the Ahlul Bayt. The narration says Fatima, one day she said these lines. She said, "Subbat alayya masaibu law annaha." There are calamities that have come my way, that I have gone through, that if Allah placed them on daytime, it would turn into nighttime. This is how difficult my life has become. The women of the Muhajirin and Ansar came to Fatima in those final days. Salama asked, Ya bint Rasulullah, Kayfa asbahti? How are you doing? How are these days like? And Fatima began to explain this long khutbah. And she said, how can I go through these days and nights? On one hand, I have the pain of losing my father. And on the other hand, dhulmul wasi. I see that his successor is constantly abused and oppressed and his rights are taken away from me. She said, I have grown tired of this world of yours. I have grown tired of the people of yours. I've grown tired of the men that belong to you. And you could tell that Fatima slowly, she's beginning to leave this world. She doesn't want to be here anymore. She doesn't want her soul to be here anymore. Maybe that brought pain to Ali because every day in the house now Fatima turns to Ali and Fatima keeps telling Ali, oh Ali, pray to Allah that He comes and takes my soul faster. Pray to Allah that Malikul Maut comes and I can leave this world. Oh Ali, living amongst these people has become too difficult for me. It's become too painful for me. I can't take being around these individuals anymore. Until those final moments came when the body of Fatima was lying on her deathbed. And all of a sudden Ali saw that her body began to become more and more lifeless. Imagine these children gathering around the body of Fatima. Maybe each one of them has thrown themselves on the body of Fatima. Maybe one of them is kissing the hands of Fatima. Maybe another one has thrown herself on the feet of Fatima. Every one of these children is going to become yatim very soon. Ali is going to have his own aitam very soon. The narration says in those moments Ali was speaking to Fatima. All of a sudden Fatima stopped speaking to Ali. She turned her head towards the skies. She said, Assalamu alayka ya Jibreel. My salam goes to you, O Jibreel. Ali knows that Fatima is now at that point where she's seeing a different world. She's speaking to a different world. Then maybe this line of Fatima broke the heart of Ali, yes? Then all of a sudden she said, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah. My salam goes to you, my father. You promised me I would be the first to join you out of my family. And Ali knows that moment has come for Fatima to now return to Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya ahla bayt al-nubuwah. My salam goes to this whole family. And then all of a sudden they saw Fatima took her final breath. And the lifeless body of the mother lies in the middle of this house. What happened to those women and the children in those moments? Ali says later, when I began to do the ghusl and kafan of Fatima, then I tied the kafan, the knots of the kafan. Then I wanted to take this body and bury it. But then I turned out to these women and these children. I called out, Ya Fidda, Ya Kulthum, Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein, come and say your final farewell to your mother. فَهَذَا الْفِرَاقَ, because this is the beginning of the time you will never see her again. وَاللَّهَ اللِّقَاء فِي الْجَنَّةِ, the next time you'll see your mother is going to be in heaven. Imagine these children came and gathered around the body of Fatima Zahra. Maybe some of them are pulling on this kafan. Maybe some of them turn to Ali and they say, Baba Ali, don't take her to the grave. How can you pour dirt on the face of our mother Fatima? How can you bury the body of our mother Fatima? What's happening in the house of Ali in these moments? Oh Ali, there will come a time on the 10th of Muharram, I tell you, on the 10th of Muharram, Zainab won't even have a chance to bury the body of Hussein. The only thing that Zainab will do on the 10th of Muharram is when Hussein is martyred in Qatligah, then Zainab will run out, she will call out, Wa Muhammadah, Wa Aliyah. She'll complain to the Prophet, Hada Husaynun bil-Ara. This is Hussein's body who's lying in the plains of Karbala. Murammalun bid-dima, it's covered in his blood. Muqatta'ul a'dha, his body has been torn apart. There are horses that have ran over the body of Hussein. And his women and children are taken as captives. Oh Ali, if today is difficult for Zainab, just wait until the 10th of Muharram. When that time will come where Zainab has nowhere to turn to, she will turn to Medina and call out for the help of her father. She will keep calling, Wa Muhammadah, Wa Muhammadah. But who is there to help the Ahlul Bayt on the plains of Karbala? Who is there to respond to the loneliness of the Ahlul Bayt in Karbala? Allah la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Let's take a moment, inshallah, to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your muhrimeen and muhrimat, the shuhada of Palestine, of Lebanon, of Pakistan, of Karachinar, and anywhere else in the world, and all the mu'mineen and mu'minat, inshallah, with Allah salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Ya Hussein.
Oh صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة، 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 صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة. قال سليم قلت يا سلمان هل دخلوا فلم يكن استئذان؟ فقال إن عزة الجبار وما على السراء من ثمار، لكنها نالت وراء الباب رعاية للستر والحجاب، فمذ رأوها عصروها عصرا كادت بنفسي أن تموت حسرة نادت أيا فضة أسنديني فقد وربي أسقطوا جنيني فأسقطت بنت الهدى وحسنا جنينها ذاك المسمى محسنا جنينها ذاك المسمى محسنا صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة 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 أتضرم النار بباب دارها وآية النور على منارها وبابها باب نبي الرحمة وباب أبواب نجاة الأمة وبابها باب نبي الرحمة وباب أبواب نجاة الأمة بل بابها باب العلي الأعلى فثم وجه الله قد تجلى فاكتسبوا بالنار غير العاري ومن ورائه عذاب النار ما أجهل القوم فإن النار لا تطفئ نور الله جل وعلا وحمرت العين وعين المعرفة تذرف بالدمع على تلك الصفة ولا يزيل حمرة العين سوى بيض السيوف يوم ينشر اللواء بيض السيوف يوم ينشر اللواء صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة 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 وللصيام رنة صداها بمسمع الدهر فما أشجاها والأثر الباقي كمثل الدملج في عضد الزهراء أقوى الحجج ومن سواد متنها اسود الفضاء يا سعد الله الإمام المرتضى ومن سواد متنها اسود الفضاء يا سعد الله الإمام المرتضى ووكسنا عن السيف في جنبيها أتى بكل ما أتى عليها ووكسنا عن السيف في جنبيها أتى بكل ما أتى عليها ولست أدري خبر المسمار سل صدرها خزانة الأسرار وفي جبين النجد ما يدمي الحشا وهل لهم أخفاء أمر قد فشى وهل لهم أخفاء أمر قد فشى صلى الله عليك صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة 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 والباب والجدار والدماء شهود صدق ما بها خفاء لقد جنى الجاني على جنبيها دكت الجبال من حنينها أهكذا يصنع بابنة النبي حرصا على ملك فيان العجب لقد جنى الجاني على جنبيها دكت الجبال من حنينها أهكذا يصنع بابنة النبي حرصا على الملك فيان العجب أتمنع المكروبة المقروحة عن البكاء خوفا من الفضيحة والله ينبغي لها تبكي دما ما دامت الأرض ودارت السماء لفقد عزها أبيها السامي ولارتضامها وذل الحامي، لكن كسر الضلع ليس ينجبر إلا بصمصام عزيز مقتدر، إذ رب تلك الأضلع الزكية رزية ما مثلها رزية، رزية ما مثلها رزية. صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة،
روی لبها نور و
या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ऐ मेरी बीबी, ऐ मेरी बीबी, तेरे दर पे इस्तिग़ासा है, तेरा ममनून है शहज़ादी ये जहां सारा, या ज़हरा, या तू हमें हिफ्ज़ अमान दे दे, अपनी चादर का साइबान दे दे, तेरी कुदरत में क्या नहीं बीबी, तू जिसे चाहे दो जहां दे दे, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा। तेरा दरबार वो सखी दर है, हर फरिश्ता जहां गदागर है, तेरे मक़दूस आसमां वाले, तेरा मक़दूस हर सिकंदर है, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या फर्श मजलिस पे और मुसल्ले पर हर जवा के है रहा है रो रो कर, हम रहे या न रहे बीबी, क़यामत रहे गमे सरवर, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, कर्ज़ मक़रूस का अदा कर दे, मुफ़लिसों का नसीब वां कर दे, जिनकी गोदी नहीं भरी बीबी, उनको औलाद तू अता कर दे, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा। तुझको उम्मत ने यूं सताया है, मर्गे मुहसिन पे भी रुलाया है, तुझको बाबा के बाद उम्मत ने हाय दरबार में बुलाया है, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा। करबला में तेरी शबीर बन के अपने बाबा की जिंदगी बन के तेरा बचपन है सकीना बीबी और जवानी है ज़ैनबे मुझसे याद आ रहा याद तुझको उम्मत ने यूं सताया है मर्गे मोहसिन पे भी रुलाया है तुझको बाबा के बाद उम्मत ने आए दरबार में बुलाया है क्या ज़ाहरा वक्त आखिर है बस मेरा बीबी अनगिनत है मेरे गुनाह बीबी वास्ता तुझको तेरे बच्चों का बख्शवाना मेरे गुनाह बीबी या ज़ाहरा करबला में तेरी छवि बनकर अपने बाबा की जिंदगी बनकर तेरा बचपन है सकीना बीती और जवानी है ज़ैनबे मुझसे या ज़ाहरा या ज़ाहरा या ज़ाहरा
مظلوم الشهيد القريب مولا أحد شان يا عبد الله يا عبد الله يا ابن الزهراء يا ابن الحيدر يكب تنهى زهر عاشورا قريبي كفن نور زبتا مرارسان بكربلا مرارسان بنينما رضانما حاجاتما شفا بده مرزایما یارینما رهبرما یا عبدالله یا عبدالله او بر مشهد میرسد هر لحظه بوی کربلا در دلم ترسم بماند آرزوی کربلا تشنه آب فراتم ای عجب مهلت بده تا بگیرم در بغل ابر شهید کربلا حسین جانم حسین جانم حسین جانم ذکر حسین المؤمنين حجة من حسن أجل على ظهوره يا حجة من حسن أجل على شعارها که سراسیم دوست می کردن برای آن که نماند در آن بدن خونا چه میرسد به علی از نور خاطرها که ناله های صبورش ندارد امشب تا. Let us take our hearts to the lost grave, the hidden grave of Fatimiyya al-Zahra. Tonight is the night of Hawaj. Tonight is the night that we are knocking at the door of the fruit of the heart of Rasulullah. Ya Fatima, Ya Fatimiyya al-Zahra, Ya bint Muhammad, Ya qurrata يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند اللهم أجل لوليك الفرج والعافية والناس. اللهم أدرك بنا قياما واشهدنا أياما واجعلنا من خير أعوانه وأنصاره. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها قليلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. 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 يكشف الهم ويكشف الضر. إن شاء الله your reward is Fatimiyya al-Zahra sallallahu alayhi ala Muhammadin wa alayhi salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi.
Some of the Some of the brothers and sisters were anticipating a Q&A, I understand, for the youth group. That wasn't coordinated with the Shaikh and he wasn't able to do it tonight, but the youth group is planning perhaps on doing something for tomorrow. If that happens, we will make the announcements for Q&A. Even though the youth group is putting it together, others are welcome as long as you are young at heart. You can also join and ask those questions. Ala Muhammad wa alayhi sallam.